At 6:14 a.m. on November 3, 1944, Private First Class Eddie Brennan pressed the length of his body into 6 inches of frozen mud inside a rotting oak log on the floor of the Hürtgen Forest. He had been there since 3 a.m. He could not feel his hands. The log was 41 feet long and 4 feet across at its widest point. Brennan had spent 3 days hollowing a 4-inch firing aperture into the northeast face. He had packed the opening with forest debris, moss, bark shavings, a single dead branch propped at the angle that matched the surrounding wood, until a man could walk within 12 feet and see nothing but a log. That morning, he was about to take his 4th confirmed kill from the position. His 3rd had been 2 days earlier. His 2nd, a German sergeant, the day before that. He never told Lieutenant Hutchins where he was going. He never asked permission. For that, he would spend the next 21 days in the stockade. The question is what he did in between. The Hürtgenwald was not a battlefield. It was a mechanism. The forest stood 8 miles wide and 12 miles deep, a wall of fir and pine and ancient oak so dense that noon looked like dusk, and dusk looked like the end of the world. The trees grew close enough that a tank could not maneuver between them without clearing work. The roads were single-lane dirt tracks that turned to axle-deep mud in October rain and froze into ridged concrete by November. The Germans had been in this forest since 1939. They had fortified every high point, every trail junction, every natural clearing of fire. They had made the forest into an extension of themselves. Between September 19th and December 16th, 1944, the Hürtgenwald consumed 33,000 American casualties. 33,000. That number, spoken aloud, sounds like a statistic. Inside the forest, it felt like arithmetic, a problem being calculated methodically, one body at a time. The problem was not courage. American soldiers had courage in the Hürtgen, in quantities that should have moved mountains. The problem was elevation. Standard Army doctrine for snipers and designated riflemen in forested terrain was explicit. Elevated positions, trees, second-story windows where available, high ground. The logic was sound in textbooks. Height creates sightlines. Sightlines create targets. What the manuals did not account for was that German soldiers in the Hürtgenwald had been drilling against exactly this doctrine for years. They had written the counter-tactics. When they heard a shot from the forest, they looked up. Every time. They swept tree lines with automatic fire. They called mortar coordinates on anything elevated. German after-action reports from October 1944 note, with something very close to professional satisfaction, that American sniper positions were consistently identified and neutralized within 17 minutes of first engagement. 17 minutes. The forest floor, by contrast, was considered useless. Dense root systems, fallen timber that went nowhere, ankle-breaking mud, and accumulated debris. No trained military mind would post a man at ground level in that terrain. It violated every tactical principle that had been internalized since the war began. That assumption was about to cost them. Edward James Brennan was born on March 4th, 1922, and in a 3-room house on Mifflin Avenue in Scranton, Pennsylvania's west side, the neighborhood where the cold dust settled so thick on windowsills that his mother stopped cleaning them when he was 8 and never started again. His father, Patrick Brennan, went down into the Lackawanna coal mine every morning at 5 a.m. and came back up at 3 p.m. looking like a different species from the man who left. He had miner's lung by the time Eddie was 12. He kept going down anyway. There was no other math that worked. What the mines gave Eddie was not a trade. It was a lesson about what the dark teaches you. You learn to be still underground. You learn that noise is information, that survival depends on your willingness to stop moving and breathe carefully and listen to what the rock is telling you. And Patrick Brennan didn't know he was teaching his son anything. He was just surviving. But Eddie absorbed it the way you absorb everything at 12, completely, without knowing it was happening. By 14, Eddie was hunting the Pocono ridgelines above Scranton with a battered Remington Model 11 his uncle had left behind when he moved to Philadelphia. He did not hunt for sport. Venison fed the family from October through February. He learned to track not from a manual, but from spending 4 falls getting it wrong, pushing deer too hard, moving when he should have waited, standing upwind out of impatience. By his 3rd season, he could hold a position in a blind for 6 hours without shifting his legs. By his 4th, he could select a spot on the forest floor and disappear inside it so completely that his cousin walked past him twice one November morning without seeing him. He left school at 16 to work alongside 2 older brothers at a lumber yard east of the city, hauling and sorting and stacking timber for men building houses in the suburbs. He learned what made wood strong and what made it rot. He learned what a hollow tree sounded like when you knocked on it, and what it meant when it made that sound. That knowledge meant nothing to him for 6 years. Then it meant everything. He was drafted on November 17th, 1943, 3 weeks after his 21st birthday. Basic training at Camp Blanding, Florida. 8 weeks in subtropical heat. That was its own kind of misery. He qualified expert with the M1 Garand, or his drill sergeant wrote superior instincts for field concealment in the evaluation report. Nobody read it. He arrived in the 28th Infantry Division as a replacement rifleman on October 7th in 1944. The 28th had been in the Hürtgen for 11 days. It had already lost 431 men. He arrived just in time for the worst of it. This video gives you the story. But the Combat Blueprint, our free newsletter, gives you everything that doesn't fit in a video. Deeper details, forgotten heroes, full tactical breakdowns, stories that'll hit you harder than this one. Free to join. 10 seconds to sign up. Link in the description. First issue is already waiting for you. Private First Class. Danny Kowalski died at 9:23 a.m. on October 12, 1944. He was 23 years old. He was from the south side of Pittsburgh, ours where his father ran a furnace at the Jones and Laughlin Steel Mill on the Monongahela. Danny had a photograph in his breast pocket of a girl named Barbara Zawilski, who worked the counter at a diner on East Carson Street and had agreed, before he shipped out, to marry him when this was finished. That morning, Kowalski climbed 16 feet up a pine tree at the southeastern edge of a German patrol corridor, exactly as Field Manual 2310 prescribed for forest sniper deployment. The position gave him a clear sight line of 200 meters through a natural gap in the canopy. He settled in. He waited. He never got a shot off. A German MG-42 crew, scanning the tree line at elevation, as they had been trained to do for exactly this kind of contact, identified his position at 9:21 a.m. They fired 94 rounds in 4.7 seconds. Our Kowalski fell 14 feet and was dead before he reached the frozen ground. Eddie Brennan was 80 yards away when it happened. He heard the burst. He knew. Corporal James Wiley of Gary, Indiana, died October 19, 1944, at 2:47 p.m. He had taken an elevated position behind a blasted tree stump, following doctrine as instructed: height, cover, field of fire. German soldiers spotted movement at the stump within 11 minutes. The first stick grenade fell short. The second one did not. Private Albert Sorrento of Providence, Rhode Island, died November 1st, 1944, at 7:08 a.m. He was 19 years old. He had been in the forest for 9 days. He had tried to compromise, taking a position in the fork of a low-hanging deadfall, still elevated but less obvious than the others. They found him anyway. A German squad sweeping the sector located him in 8 minutes and called it in to a mortar team. They always looked up. Eddie Brennan lay in his foxhole the night of November 1st and did not sleep. He was not processing grief. He had already done that with Kowalski. What occupied him now was something colder, something that felt more like arithmetic than feeling. He was running the pattern. Kowalski, 16 feet up, identified in 2 minutes. Wiley, elevated behind cover, identified in 11 minutes. Sorrento, lower than the others, still elevated, still found. The variable that stayed constant in all 3 deaths was not the men. It was the direction of the search. They always looked up. He thought about the Pocono ridges above Scranton. He thought about the mornings he had dissolved into the forest floor, lying flat under a brush pile, inside a deadfall, pressed against a bank of roots. And the times his cousin had walked past him and registered nothing, because the human eye, when searching for a predator, searches at the level it expects to find one. You don't look down at mud and roots and rotting wood. You look where you think a man would choose to be. A man wouldn't choose to be in a log. He rolled onto his back and stared at the black sky through the tree branches. He could hear the forest settling in the cold, ticking and cracking like a building in a storm. He knew exactly what he was going to do. He brought it to Lieutenant Ray Hutchins on the morning of November 2nd. Hutchins was 28 years old, from Columbus, Ohio, and with the particular stillness of a man who had seen enough to stop being surprised. He listened without interrupting. That alone put him above most officers Brennan had spoken to. "Ground level," Brennan said, "inside the log. They scan at shoulder height and above. Every time." Field Manual 23-10 specifies elevated positions in forested terrain. "Yes, sir," and Kowalski followed it exactly. Hutchins was quiet for a moment. He looked at the floor of the CP. "Zero mobility once you're inside." "I don't need mobility. I need them not to see me. If they locate you in a fixed position, there's no cover between you and a grenade." "Yes, sir." "I can't authorize an unsanctioned modification to your operational method." Brennan waited. Hutchins looked at the map on the table. He did not look at Brennan. He said, "I need you for a patrol on the 3rd. I need you there by 0600. Everything you do between now and then is at your own discretion." That was the authorization. It wasn't written. It wasn't said directly. At the court-martial, 6 weeks later, Hürtgen would testify under oath that he had given Brennan no such permission. He would be telling a version of the truth that omitted the only part that mattered. "Yes, sir," Brennan said. He picked up his rifle. He walked out. Hürtgen did not watch him go. He had already found the log. He had found it 2 days before he talked to Hürtgen, on October 31st, during a patrol that took him 300 meters south of the main line. A fallen oak, massive, dead for years, lying at the base of a shallow terrain depression that funneled naturally into a northwest patrol corridor. And any German unit moving from the eastern tree line toward the ridge would cross within 40 meters of it. He tested the position for 6 hours on November 1st before he said a word to anyone. He lay still inside the cavity and watched a German 2-man scout team pass at 11:14 a.m. at a distance of 31 meters. They did not look down once. They swept the canopy and the mid-heights. They walked past a man holding a rifle and never registered him. That told him what he needed to know. He spent November 2nd working the aperture with a bayonet blade, cutting at an angle that optimized the northwest field of fire. 140 degrees of coverage across the patrol corridor. The existing cavity gave him 38 inches of working length and 14 inches of clearance at the shoulder. He packed the firing port with moss and bark debris until the opening was invisible at 10 meters. He ran his hand along the outside face of the log 3 times until it felt continuous. No edge, no gap, just wood. He loaded 8-round stripper clips in sequence and tucked them inside his coat where body heat might keep the metal from seizing. He brought a second pair of wool socks against his abdomen for the same reason. He did not bring food. He did not bring extra water. He knew the cold would be the problem he could not solve. He knew it from the Poconos. He went anyway. He was inside the log by 3:04 a.m. on November 3rd. The cold came immediately and completely. The ground beneath the log had frozen in the night, and the chill rose up through the frozen soil, and through his coat, and through the wool underlayer, and through the second pair of socks, and found skin anyway. He controlled his breathing, slow, through the nose, moisture kept inside so no vapor cloud drifted from the aperture and made the wood look warm. He had done this before. November deer season in Pennsylvania, 14 degrees at 4 a.m. in a blind that was barely a blind. He knew how to make himself small inside cold. He waited. First light arrived at 6:09 a.m. Not suddenly, but in gradations. The forest shifting from black to gray to a dim green-brown. The ground mist moving between the trunks at knee height, like something cautious. Brennan could see 140 meters through the aperture. The patrol corridor was empty. At 6:41 a.m., he heard them. A 4-man German scout patrol, moving northwest on a route he had watched them use 3 mornings in sequence. Standard 5-meter spacing. The lead man had a Kar 98 slung across his back. The second carried an MP40 at the low ready. They moved well. They communicated with hand signals. They were professionals. They were scanning at shoulder height and above. Brennan did not fire. He let all 4 pass at 28 meters, tracked the last man's collar until he disappeared into the tree line and did not move. He had learned in the Poconos that the first animal through was never the last. He waited. At 8:17 a.m., firing broke out to the northeast. A German MG-42, then responding American rifles, then the low percussion of grenades. He heard men yelling in English. He heard the MG-42's signature tempo, 1,200 rounds per minute, like tearing canvas. And he understood what was happening. A patrol from his company had made contact with a prepared position. That was his trigger. At 8:22 a.m., the first group came through the corridor. 8 men moving fast toward the sound of the firefight, spread across a 40-meter front, angled exactly across his field of fire at a distance of 35 meters. They were not scouting. They were reinforcing. He took the first shot at the lead man. He worked the bolt and took the second before the first had stopped moving. He rotated inside the log to follow the group as they scattered left and right. 3 confirmed before they broke for the tree line and disappeared. The firing to the northeast had thinned. He waited. At 8:31 a.m., a second group came through, larger. He counted 12 before they entered the corridor. Moving in a loose tactical line, rifles up, communicating in short bursts. Their squad leader was pointing at the tree canopy, gesturing upward, directing attention to the elevated positions, looking for the sniper where snipers were supposed to be. He worked methodically. The Garand's 8-round clip. Then the reload, hands working by feel in the confined space, fingers already moving past the threshold of reliable sensation, but the muscle memory holding where the mind had to reach for it. He had practiced this in cold so many times that his hands knew the sequence without him. 8 confirmed. The group scattered north. He reloaded and waited. At 8:49 a.m., Hutchins came over the radio in a voice that was working to stay level. "Brennan, sit rep. Where are you?" "On the floor," Brennan said, which was accurate. "Say again?" "I'm on it. Stout." The German tactical response arrived at 9:03 a.m. A disciplined 8-man squad, moving in spread formation, executing a systematic search for a sniper position. They were scanning the tree line at 15-foot intervals. Their squad leader was pointing at each elevated feature in sequence. A split trunk 30 meters to Brennan's left, a deadfall pile against a standing pine, a limestone shelf 3 feet above ground level. They came within 14 feet of the log. The squad leader stopped. He looked directly at the log. Brennan stopped breathing. His heartbeat moved into his temples. He held completely still, watching through the aperture as the German officer stood 4 meters away and stared at 41 feet of fallen oak. The officer looked at the log for 4 seconds. Then he looked up. He moved on. 14 confirmed. Up between 9:15 a.m. and 10:48 a.m., 3 more contact groups came through the corridor. Isolated soldiers and pairs moving back toward the German line from the northeast engagement, using the same terrain funnel, taking the path of least resistance because that is what men under pressure do. Brennan did not fire on all of them. He took those who carried map cases. He took the one with a rank collar visible at 20 meters. By 10:48 a.m., he had 18 confirmed kills. His right shoulder had stopped feeling the recoil 40 minutes earlier. His fingers could no longer manage fine motor work. He knew this because he had tested it. The cold had come all the way in. He spent 22 minutes moving 30 yards back toward the American line, crawling flat through frozen mud, stopping twice when he heard movement, or arriving at the tree line pale and slow, and carrying everything he had brought. He came out of the trees at 11:14 a.m., and Sergeant Walt Morrison grabbed his arm before he took 3 steps. Brennan's face was the color of old newsprint. His lips had gone blue-gray at the corners. He had stopped shivering, which Morrison recognized as the wrong direction. Men who stopped shivering in the Hürtgen had a narrowing window. They got him into the CP tent with 2 wool blankets and a canteen of hot coffee he held in both hands without lifting to his mouth for 3 minutes while sensation came back into his fingers in long, burning waves. A medic's field note recorded his core temperature at 95.4 degrees Fahrenheit. Treatment time, 11:19 a.m. Hutchins came in at 11:31 a.m. He stood in the entrance for a moment, looking at Brennan wrapped in blankets, with both hands on a canteen. Then he said quietly, "How many?" Brennan thought about it. He had lost precise count in the last hour. 18, he said. I think 18 confirmed. Hutchins said nothing. Confirmed, Brennan said again. By 1400 hours that afternoon, word had moved through the company. By the following morning, it had reached 2 adjacent battalions. Men wanted to know where he had been, what the position looked like, how he had built the aperture. Brennan answered the technical questions and nothing else. By November 7th, 3 men from B Company had tested similar positions with Hutchins's tacit awareness. Private Carl Deming of Ames, Iowa, went into a hollow elm log on November 9th, 1944, covering a German approach route near Germeter, where he recorded 7 confirmed kills before he extracted with frostbite damage to the index finger of his right hand. He said later that it seemed like a fair trade. Corporal Thomas Reel of Baltimore took a modified ground-level position under a blow-down pile on November 11th. 4 confirmed kills. The German commander facing that sector submitted an after-action report on November 14th, noting with evident professional frustration that his patrols were sustaining sniper casualties from unidentified low-level firing positions and requesting tactical guidance from division. The report listed the American unit designation. It listed the sector grid. It did not list Brennan's name. It did not need to. The court-martial convened on December 2nd, 1944, at division headquarters in Roth, Germany, 21 miles from the Hürtgenwald, which that morning felt like 21,000. The room was a requisitioned farmhouse sitting room. It had a cloth on the table and framed agricultural prints on the walls. It was clean and warm and quiet in a way that felt like a different continent from where these events had occurred. Lieutenant Colonel Miles Whitaker, Major Frank Purdy, and Captain Arthur Greer sat behind the table in uniforms that had not seen mud. None of the 3 had spent a night in the Hürtgen. The charges were read aloud. Deliberate deviation from Field Manual 23-10. Specifications for designated riflemen positioning. Unauthorized modification of assigned combat method. Failure to report position to superior officer on November 3rd, 1944. How do you plead? Whitaker said. Guilty, Brennan said. Flat, immediate, without hesitation or apology. You understand that Field Manual 23-10 specifies elevated positions for sniper and designated rifleman engagements in forested terrain. Yes, sir. And you understood that at the time of the engagement? Yes, sir. Then would you care to explain why you chose to disregard it? Brennan was quiet for a moment. Kowalski, he said. Wiley. Sorrento. He paused. They followed it exactly, sir. And the Germans killed them because of it. The Germans scan elevated positions. Every time. I stopped giving them something to scan. Major Purdy leaned forward slightly. And you brought this theory to Lieutenant Hutchins? Brennan looked across the room at Hutchins, who was seated 3 chairs to his left. Hutchins was looking at the table. I discussed the terrain problem with Lieutenant Hutchins, Brennan said. And he authorized your method? A pause that lasted perhaps 2 seconds. It felt longer than that. No, sir, Brennan said. He has to say that. 2 of the 3 officers exchanged a glance. The third wrote something on his notepad. The room was quiet enough to hear the scratch of the pen on paper. Whitaker cleared his throat. The field manual exists because men with more experience than any individual soldier. Yes, sir, Brennan said, and Kowalski followed it. The court-martial adjourned at 4:17 p.m. without resolution and reconvened the following morning. That evening, Hutchins came to the stockade. He sat down across the small table from Brennan and put his hands flat on the wood and looked at them for a moment without speaking. For what it's worth, he said. Sir, it was the right call. I know that, sir. Hutchins nodded once. He stood up. He walked out without turning back. The sentence was handed down on December 3rd, 1944. Reduction in grade from private first class to private, 21 days confinement to stockade, forfeiture of 2 months' pay. Given that Brennan had killed 18 men in a single morning from a position no German soldier had thought to search, the sentence had a quality of absurdity so complete it nearly achieved a kind of elegance. He served every day of it. He was released on December 24th, 1944, and reassigned to a supply battalion east of Liège. He did not return to the Hürtgen. The 28th Division's role in that particular section of hell was largely finished. The war in Europe ended on May 8th, 1945. Brennan was in a motor pool outside Mannheim when it happened. Someone fired a pistol into the air. He watched the brass casing tumble and hit the dirt. He came home on July 11th, 1945, on a troop ship that docked at Baltimore. His mother was at the pier. His father was not. Patrick Brennan had died of miner's lung in February 1944, before his son had shipped to Europe. Patrick never knew what had happened in the forest. He would not have understood the tactics of it, but he might have recognized something in the method. Eddie went back to Scranton. He opened a hardware and lumber supply business in 1947 on Moosic Street, 3 blocks from the house on Mifflin Avenue, where he had grown up. He was fair with prices. He extended credit to men who were short and didn't make it a discussion. He hired veterans first. He married Helen Caruso in 1948. She was a school teacher from Dunmore who had a gift for patience, and they had 2 daughters, Carol and Marie. They bought a house in Green Ridge with a yard big enough for a garden. He coached Little League for 11 years. He fixed things for neighbors without charging for the labor. When people asked about the war, and they stopped asking eventually, he said the same thing every time. I was in Germany for a while. It was cold. He never mentioned the Hürtgen in public after 1945. He never mentioned the log. He never said Danny Kowalski's name out loud to anyone who hadn't been there. He was a good man, people said. Quiet, but good. The U.S. Army Field Manual on Infantry Sniping was revised in 1953. FM 23-10, Revised Edition, Chapter 4, Section 7, addressed forest concealment, with a new subsection titled Ground Level Natural Positions. The language read, "In dense forested terrain, where enemy forces have been conditioned to scan elevated positions, ground-level concealment within natural debris, including hollow timber, root masses, and organic fill, may offer superior concealment probability and should be considered as a primary, not secondary, option." The section credited Field Innovations developed during European theater operations, 1944 to 45. No name appeared in the text. The technique entered the U.S. Army Ranger School curriculum in 1957, designated ground hide methodology. Rangers trained on it through the late 50s and carried it to Vietnam, where dense jungle terrain made it standard practice in certain units. It entered the Special Forces stalking curriculum in 1961. Today, it is taught under different names depending on the school: ground hide, flush concealment, terrain merge positioning. The instructors explain the logic clearly and correctly. Human threat detection defaults to eye level and above. What exists below the threshold of expectation is functionally invisible. Every year, somewhere, a soldier learns this. He internalizes it. He trains with it. And if he is fortunate, uses it and comes home because of it. Not one of them knows where it came from. Not one of them knows that a man named Eddie Brennan worked it out in the cold in November 1944. Lying on the frozen floor of the Hürtgen Forest, inside a dead oak tree, with 18 confirmed kills and a court-martial waiting for him when he walked out. In October 1987, and at a 28th Infantry Division reunion in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, a man named Carl Deming crossed a hotel ballroom and found Eddie Brennan standing near the windows, holding a cup of coffee he wasn't drinking. Deming was 63 years old. He was missing the top joint of his right index finger, lost to frostbite in November 1944, which he had learned to work around so thoroughly that most people never noticed. "I used your log," he said. Brennan looked at him. "November 9th, east of Germeter. Found a hollow elm. 7 confirmed." He paused. "I came home because of what you worked out." Brennan was quiet for a moment. He looked out the window at the parking lot. He said, "Kowalski figured out the hard part. I just didn't want to end up the same way." Deming looked at him for a long moment. "That's not separate from courage," he said. "That's exactly what it is." They shook hands. They did not exchange addresses. They did not see each other again. Brennan drove home to Scranton that night. He did not mention the conversation to Helen. Edward James. Brennan died on September 14th, 1993. He was 71 years old. He had been carrying boxes of lumber stock in the warehouse behind his shop on Moosic Street when his heart stopped. He was found by his part-time employee, a student from the University of Scranton, who had worked there 2 summers. The boy said later that everything looked normal, except for the boxes on the floor, which Brennan had set down carefully before he fell. He died the way he had lived, quietly, in a building that smelled of cut wood. The obituary in the Scranton Times-Tribune mentioned his hardware business. 11 years of Little League coaching, his wife Helen, his daughters Carol and Marie, and his service with the 28th Infantry Division in World War II. It noted he had received the Combat Infantryman badge. It did not mention the Hürtgen. It did not mention November 3rd, 1944. It did not mention 18 confirmed kills from a position no German officer thought to search, or the 21 days in the stockade that followed, or the technique now taught in military schools without attribution. His grave in Cathedral Cemetery reads, Private Edward J. Brennan, 1922 to 1993. Private, not Private First Class. They never corrected it. In 2006, Dr. Margaret Voss, a military historian at the University of Wisconsin specializing in World War II infantry tactics, published an article in the Journal of Military History titled Innovation from Below, Ground-Level Concealment, and the Tactical Evolution of American Sniping in the Hürtgen Forest, 1944. She had arrived at Brennan's name by cross-referencing Army court-martial records from the Hürtgen period with German 275th Infantry Division after-action reports from November 1944, specifically a sector commander's notation about systematic low-angle American casualties that matched no known tactical protocol in German countermeasure files. She estimated that the technique, as practiced by Brennan and the 11 or more men who adopted variants of it in subsequent weeks, likely preserved between 40 and 70 American lives over the course of the campaign. The article was cited by 4 other historians in the following decade. Nobody else read it. He's somewhere right now. A soldier's learning to disappear into the ground. He's pressing his body into mud, or sand, or grass, making himself part of the earth, becoming something the human eye moves past, because the eye is not conditioned to look there. He learned it from an instructor, who learned it from a training manual, that learned it from field reports, that learned it from a man lying inside a dead oak tree in the Hürtgen Forest in November 1944, who learned it from a deer blind in Pennsylvania, who learned it from a father, who knew what the dark teaches you, if you're still enough to listen. If you followed this story this far, you know it's not really about sniping. It's about the gap between the man who solves the problem and the institution that files the solution away without a name. These stories like this one disappear because nobody writes them down. Or, when they do, nobody reads it. If this channel does one thing, it's make sure these men get said out loud. Hit subscribe if that matters to you. It keeps the lights on for the next one. Danny Kowalski followed the rules exactly right. He died at 23 with a photograph in his breast pocket of a girl named Barbara, who would spend decades not knowing what the rules had cost him. Eddie Brennan bent the rules, saved lives, served his punishment, came home, and fixed things for his neighbors until his heart gave out in a warehouse on Musick Street. The manual carries his method. The grave got his rank wrong.